This is Connor Jones, and as you may have guessed, this is Untold Tales from this side of nowhere. I'm your host, and I'm bringing you another story from that tiny town and about as close as you can get to the middle of nowhere. That is Poverty Flats, Wyoming. Before we get rolling with this week's brand new story, here's a message from our sponsors.
We're sponsored by Basins Market, located in Basin, Wyoming. Basins Market is your destination for groceries, fresh produce, and the best meat department in the Bighorn Basin. Come in and sample their wide selection of products Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Sundays from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Do you have a noxious weed problem? The team at 307 Pest Management can help. We offer residential and commercial noxious weed management that is safe and affordable. Whether you have a parking lot, a yard, or some production land that needs treated for noxious weeds, 307 Pest Management is ready to help get your weeds under control. Give them a call today for a free quote at 307-250-0614 or send an email to 307pestmanagement@gmail.com.
Well, summer is rolling along. We're halfway through July, and it's hard to believe that summer is down to just about the last month. I'll be headed back to work for a training August 13th and then officially start back up, I think the 17th, something like that. Yeah, August 17th. So just enjoying these last few weeks. We're getting the weeds sprayed around the Bighorn River, taking out some Russian olives and salt cedars. And just trying to make it through the heat. We've been working half days because once it gets to 85 degrees, plants just stop absorbing herbicides, and that means we can't spray once it hits 85. So this week we've been shutting things down around 11 because it's just so hot. And one thing that has done is given me some afternoons here during the last several weeks of summer we've got, and it's given me a little time to fish with my boys, and this story actually has to do with that. So, here goes this week's story, While You Were Out. I love fishing, and I love my kids. So when I get to combine the two, it's fantastic. Anyone who has little boys knows that watching a 4-year-old boy hook a trout and reel it in is one of the greatest experiences you can have. The other day, on the way to our family's cabin, we stopped at a creek right by the highway to cast a few times, and I let Al Jr. reel in the first thing I caught. "Here, buddy, reel him in." You know how little boys are when they have a fish on. His face was set with the most intense look, and he reeled like his little life depended on it. In a moment, the cutbow trout came out of the water, wriggling and splashing. I grabbed the line and pulled it up on the bank. "Look, Dad, how big is it?" Al Jr. asked excitedly. "Oh, he's about 6 inches," I said. "Good job reeling him in." Little Al smiled happily as I held up the little fish. "Want to toss him back?" "Sure." He gingerly accepted the slippery fish and gave it a toss back into the pool in front of us. We moved down the creek a ways, me half carrying, half dragging the 2-year-old over the rocks and holding the fly rod in my free hand. Once we got settled and the 2-year-old was safely nestled on a rock, I flicked my fly back out over the water. "Here, Ollie, come stand by Daddy so you can reel in the next fish," I instructed the 4-year-old. Ollie clambered over the rocks to come stand right next to me. Luckily, he's still short enough I can easily cast over his head. On my second cast, I felt the strike, and I jerked back to set the hook. "We got one, Ollie!" I yelled happily. "Here, reel him in." I passed the pole to the little blonde-haired boy, and with wide eyes he began cranking on the reel. The tip of the rod bent down as he reeled, and I reached out with one hand to grab the line as it cut through the water toward our rock. This wasn't a little fish. With my fingers wrapped around the line, I pulled the fish up and out of the water. A beautiful trout flailed around on the grasshopper fly, and I landed it on the rocks beside us. Look, it's bigger than Owl's fish, Ollie cried. I hid a smile as my oldest son crossed his arms and humphed. The smile on Ollie's face was enormous. As he took the 8-inch trout in his chubby little hands, he just looked so happy with his mess of sun-bleached blonde hair and his dark tan arms and face. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but realized I had left it in the truck. Darn, I left my phone in the truck, I said. It's okay, Daddy, Ollie said. Can I throw him back? Yep, go ahead, I smiled. Splash. Yes, fishing with kids is wonderful. Until it isn't. While catching fish with your boys is one of the best experiences a father can have, it can also come with a lot of unpleasant things. Little boys are wizards when it comes to fishing. Only someone in possession of arcane powers could take a perfectly rigged fishing pole, cast it once, and produce a knot that takes a half hour to unravel. Little boys also lose interest very quickly when the fish aren't biting, and before you know it, they're either throwing rocks into the spot where you're fishing, or they're in the water themselves. And if there's one thing that makes wives and mothers unhappy, it's returning home with little boys who are covered in mud. That probably explains why it happened. While I accept some responsibility, I don't think it was entirely my fault. I mean, little boys still make their own choices, right? And I was paying attention to what they were doing. Mostly. You know how it goes. I should probably explain. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had taken the boys fishing at Beck Lake outside of Cody. It's a good place to go if you don't have the time to travel to a real fishing hole, and it's very accessible to kids. We were leaving the next day for a trip to Montana to see Lily's family, and I wanted to get in a little fishing before the spring slipped away. It started out as a great little outing, with the boys excited to be there, and me excited for them to catch some fish. My mother says that when she was a girl, the fishing at Beck Lake was terrible, but that day, it was great. Al Jr. had his little pole set up with a Rapala minnow, and before I could even get Ollie's worm in the water, he was jumping up and down and screaming he had caught a fish. What? I asked, looking up from the hook I was tying onto Ollie's line. You got one already? Sure enough, as Al Jr. cranked on his reel, the tip of his pole was curving down toward the water where his line sang with tension. He hadn't cast far, just 10 yards from the beach, and I couldn't have been more shocked if Sasquatch had walked out of the trees and offered us some beef jerky. My amazement only grew when I saw what little Al had hooked. Holy cow! Look at the size of that fish! I hollered. It was enormous. There, thrashing in the shallows, was a cutthroat trout, at least 17 inches long. And it wasn't just long, it was fat. This was a huge fish. Get it, Dad? Al Jr. shouted. I squatted down and grabbed the line, pulling the massive trout out and onto the bank. Its skin was slippery and cool as I cradled it in my hands. The dark green with speckles of black fringed its wide, unclosing eyes. Its enormous craw opened and closed as it wriggled in my hands. The distinctive orange markings of a cutthroat trout gleamed on its cheeks and on its throat. Great job, Junior! I hollered. Can I hold it? He asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Sure, I said with a smile. Whoa, he said, gingerly accepting the fish. It's so big. Yeah, it is, I agreed happily. Should we let him go and catch another one? I asked. Yeah, Al Jr. cheered. Ollie and Freddie looked on in wide-eyed amazement as Al Jr. gave the huge fish a toss, and it splashed back into the lake and disappeared into the murky water. "That was so cool, Dad!" Al Jr. yelled, his arms spread wide. "I want to catch another one." "Okay," I said, not wanting to tell my oldest son you never caught more than one fish that size on a single day. "Go ahead and cast again." As I returned to rigging up Ollie's pole with a worm, little Al drew back with his pole and flicked the trusty Rapala out into the lake once more. "Here, Ollie," I said, and flicked his bobber out onto the lake. "Hold on to this and wait for a bite." "Okay, Daddy." He nodded and accepted the pole. Rather than adding a hook to little Freddie's line, I decided to merely attach a bobber he could cast. I was just fastening the red and white ball to the end of his fishing line when I heard shouting. "Dad, I got another one!" I turned to look over at Al Jr. again and saw, to my surprise, the tip of his pole bending down toward the water once more. As he cranked on the reel, I dropped Freddie's little pole and watched with mounting excitement as Al reeled in another fish. At first I thought it was going to be a normal fish, the kind I'm used to catching. But no, as I watched, another leviathan of the deep thrashed its way toward shore. It was another enormous cutbow. I reached out and felt the line taut under my fingers and drew the fish back onto the bank. This one was even bigger than the first. Its gills opened and closed as it lay panting on the shore. Now that I looked at it, I realized it had more of a pink stripe running down the middle and a darker coloration. "Is it another cutthroat, Dad?" Al asked excitedly. "It's bigger than the other one." "Yeah, it just might be," I agreed. "It looks like a cutbow to me." "Cool," Al Jr. said. "It's a big fish, Daddy," Ollie piped up. "Yes, it is," I said. "Let's get a picture of you guys with this fish." The three boys smiled next to the huge trout, flashing toothy grins framed by their corn silk blonde hair. "Nice one," I smiled. "Okay, let's put him back." I picked up the trout and removed the hook from its mouth, then let him slide through my fingers back into the water. With a flick of his tail, the beautiful trout was gone. "I can't believe I caught two fish," Al hollered, stomping in excitement. "Me neither," I said, shaking my head. "Lightning usually doesn't strike twice." "What do you mean, lightning doesn't strike twice?" Al Jr. asked, puzzled. "It's just not very common to catch two giant fish like that so quickly," I explained. "Oh," Al Jr. said. "Well, I did." I grinned. "Do you think you can catch three?" "I bet," he said, and picked his pole back up. The next half hour or so passed uneventfully. The bobbers bobbed. Al cast and reeled his Rapala. Freddie broke the bobber I put on his line after slamming it down on a rock in an attempt to cast. Ollie lost interest in fishing and began playing with his monster trucks at the water's edge. "Come on," I said, as I reeled in a spinner I had selected from the tangle of my tackle box. "There's gotta be another big trout out there." "Dad, can I be done for a while?" Al asked, looking bored. "Yes, that's fine," I said to my oldest son. Al reeled in his pole and set it down. "It's cold. Can we go play in the truck?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm cold, Daddy," Ollie said, shivering in his little water boots. Freddie held up his muddy hands and said, "Cold," then gave his hands a shake. "Here, I'll start it for you guys," I said. "Let's put some of the stuff in the truck. I just want to take a few more casts and then we can go." I set my pole down and cast back a backwards glance to where Ollie's bobber was still moving up and down with the gentle waves on the lake. I snagged a Paw Patrol water bottle and the container of worms and took Freddie's hand. At the truck, Al Jr. pulled the door open and climbed inside. I lifted Freddie and then Ollie up and onto the front seat, then fished in my pocket for the key. Please don't play with all the buttons, I said, checking on Ollie's bobber again. I just knew there was another massive fish out there, and I was feeling a little put out that Al Jr. had managed to catch two of the humongous trout, and I had been unable to land even one. What can we play with, Dad? Al asked. I don't know, I said. How about the monster trucks? Okay, Al said. Can we go home now? Just give Daddy a few more minutes, okay? I said, and gently closed the door. Freddie pressed his face to the glass and smashed his little nose flat. Then, as he stared at me with mischievous eyes, he dragged his face slowly to the side. I tried not to think about the little streak he was leaving behind on the inside of the glass. Back at the water's edge, Ollie's bobber was still as undisturbed as ever, and I sighed as I scooped up my pole and gave my spinner a cast. I was watching Ollie's bobber as I reeled, thinking about what Lily might have made for dinner, when I felt a jerk on my line. Whoa, I said, my heart suddenly beating faster. I pulled on my line and felt resistance. Fish on! I hollered with a whoop. I reeled like mad, and I could tell this was no 6-inch trout. The line hummed with tension as I reeled, and almost immediately I could see the dorsal fin of the fish breaking the water, 15 yards offshore. A huge splash confirmed my hopes. It's a big one, I cheered. Several more turns of the reel, and the trout was approaching the shore. I heard the truck door open behind me, and a little voice called out, Did you get one, Daddy? I did, I called back over my shoulder. As I pulled the trout up and onto the gravel on the shore, I heard the pounding of little feet behind me. Whoa, Daddy, Ollie yelled. You caught a fish. I smiled and picked up the trout, another cutbow. It was at least 16 inches long, similar to Al Jr.'s, and my grin was probably close to that size too. Look at that, Dad, Al said happily. We snapped another picture, a selfie this time, and I admired the trout for a moment. Can I throw him back? Al Jr. asked. Sure, I said, and handed the trout to my son. He bent down and tossed the fish into the shallows and wiped his hands on his pants as he straightened back up. That's when I noticed the dirt on his hands. Very black dirt. The kind they put in. I turned to look back toward the truck, and my heart sank. Through the open door, I could see a black stain spread across the front seat of my F-150. Guys, I hollered, and looked down at my 3 offspring. Did you dump the worms in the truck? No, Ollie said, shaking his head, eyes wide. We didn't dump them, Daddy. Well, then who did? I asked. I can't know, he responded. They were taking a ride in our monster trucks. I slapped a hand to my face and took a deep breath. I can't leave you guys alone for 5 minutes, I sighed. We'll clean it up, Daddy, Al Jr. said, and he hurried toward the truck. You guys better, I said, and picked up my pole. Come on, Freddie, I sighed and headed for the truck. I helped Al and Ollie brush as much dirt from the seat as we could back into the container. There were indeed worms in their monster trucks, and the boys helped me pull the squirming invertebrates from the back of the die-cast vehicles and put them back in the container. Did you help with this? I said, turning to little Freddie. He just grinned back at me with black dirt smeared on his face. Your mom isn't going to be too happy about this, I grumbled. He didn't put worms in the monster trucks, Daddy, Al said. He was playing with the steering wheel. Well, he has an awful lot of dirt on his hands and face, I said. He must have played with a few worms. They aren't in the trucks, Al said with a shrug. Well, I don't see them, I said. Let's get you guys home. Mommy's going to be wondering where we are, and we need a pack for our trip. The next morning, we loaded up the minivan and left for our weekend in Montana. It was a clear, warm day, and the temperature climbed into the mid 70s. It was one of the first truly warm days of spring, and we had a pleasant trip. Over the weekend, the boys played with their grandparents, and we had a good visit. Sunday, we made the drive home, and Monday morning, I got up early for work. It was the second to last week of school, and I was already looking ahead to summer, as was every employee and student at the school. Al and I were a little rushed getting out the door since I had decided last minute to make pancakes in honor of it being the last Monday of the school year. But if we hurried, we would still make it on time. I pulled the garage door closed behind me and slid past Al to the driver's side. We both pulled our doors open, and I stopped dead in my tracks. "Dad!" Al hollered. "What is that smell?" It was absolutely putrid. I retched as the horrifying wave of nostril-searing stench hit me. My eyes watered. I began coughing, and Al Jr. shut his door again. Good idea. I slammed the door shut and leaned on the side of the truck, panting for a moment. A faint odor still hung in the air in spite of the closed door. "Dad, what is that?" Al Jr. asked again. I was silent for a moment, but I had recognized the smell immediately. Anyone who has spent some time fishing would. "We didn't get all the worms back into the container," I finally said. "Uh-oh," Al Jr. breathed. We drove the van to school. And when we got back home at the end of the day, I gave Al and Ollie a good talking to. "You guys shouldn't play with worms in the truck," I scolded. "Now Daddy has to clean the truck out, and it smells terrible," I grumbled. "We only played with the ones in the monster trucks, honest," Al Jr. said. "We put all of our worms back in the container." He said this with all the earnest innocence of a 6-year-old. "Well, apparently not," I huffed. More than a little irate, I donned rubber gloves and an N95 mask and went to work. I could almost feel the cloud of decomposing worms hit me when I opened the truck door once again. I began on the passenger side and looked all over the seat. No worms. I looked under the seat. No worms. I checked the driver's side, then the rear seat. I felt between the cracks in the seat, sure I would make contact with the rotting bodies of some poor worms at any moment. But aside from some trail mix and a nickel, I came up with nothing. Now I was getting really perplexed. Where on earth were those worms at? I groaned in frustration and put my hands on my hips, looking angrily into the cab of the truck. If I didn't find those worms, I would never be able to drive this truck again. As it was, I had serious doubts I would ever get the smell of the decaying wigglers out of the vehicle. Maybe I could find someone who lost their sense of smell in the COVID pandemic who might be willing to buy it. Why had I let those kids play in the truck all by themselves? Why hadn't I just kept the worms with me? Usually I could count on them to play in there without causing too much trouble. Sure, they would turn on the radio, and Freddie would turn on the windshield wipers, honk the horn, and switch on the lights. Sometimes he would close all the air vents and... oh no. A sinking feeling came over me, and I'm sure any onlooker would have seen the color drain from my face. I sprang into action, turning on the light on my phone, and approached the air vent on the driver's side. I gulped and directed the flashlight's beam down into the hole and gasped. There in the bottom of the vent was a wad of sorry-looking earthworms. I gagged and closed my eyes for a moment. No, Freddy wasn't putting worms in monster trucks. He was putting worms in real trucks. And now I had to get them out. Luckily, there was a bend in the air conditioner duct, and I was able to fish the worms out with a bit of wire without too much trouble. But try as I might, I have not been able to get rid of the smell. I sprayed bleach and everything else I could think of into the vent, crammed dryer sheets into it, and I hung every variety of smelly tree they sell from my rearview mirror. No matter what I do, the smell lingers. The other day, my buddy Mark Crawfry and I took the truck fishing. Woo-wee! You should try showering sometime, Mark complained when he got into the truck. It's not me, I said. It's some worms my 2-year-old jammed down the air vent. Sure, Mark nodded, rolling down his window. I'm telling the truth, I said defensively. You should know what rotting worms smell like. Mark shrugged. Have you tried bleach? Yep. How about dryer sheets in the vent? Mm-hmm, I nodded. Huh, he murmured. How long ago was this? 2 months, I sighed. Well, Mark said, my father-in-law still hasn't gotten his sense of smell back since the COVID. He hasn't? I asked, suddenly perking up a bit. Nope, Mark said. Do you think he would be interested in the truck? I asked hopefully. Nah, probably not, Mark said. You don't think so? I asked, crestfallen. Mark shook his head. He's a Chevy guy. He says Ford stinks. Well, in this case, I said, he's absolutely right. Well, there you go. While you were out, never under any circumstances leave your children and a container of worms alone in your pickup truck. There could be long-lasting consequences. Maybe you've left kids in a truck before and lived to regret it. If that's the case, I'd love to hear about it. We can commiserate together, and if you send me a message on Facebook, I'll be sure to get back to you, or you can shoot me an email at untoldtalesthepodcast@gmail.com. And for those of you out there who are wondering, my boys didn't actually leave worms in the truck, but I thought it made a pretty good story. It's been a blast sharing it with you, and as always, this has been another Untold Tale from this side of nowhere, where we work twice as hard for half as much, and still find time for the important things, like fishing. See you next time, folks.